Hello. In the late 1970s to early 1980s, if you wanted a video camera, you'd probably have something like this. This huge lump is a camera only, so at the end of it is a cable, and that would connect to a portable video recorder of your favourite format, VHS, Beta, V2000, or maybe one or two others. But clearly this wasn't ideal. People wanted something a bit more in one piece. And it was Sony who invented the camcorder. So in the early 1980s, you could get a single piece, camera and recorder in one. Though we know it as a camcorder, they weren't called that in the early days. So this was a much nicer solution. And you could get these in VHS or Beta. They never made them in any other formats in the early days. So you'd record on that and then put that into your domestic machine. So your choice about whether you chose VHS or Beta was almost certainly dictated by what your domestic machine was. So in the mid to later 1980s, much smaller and more usable camcorders came along. But there was a format battle, oh why wouldn't there be, between Video8 on the one hand and VHSC on the other. And which one should I choose, you might say, in the mid to late 1980s? Well, the lady in the Panasonic shop said, buy VHSC. Almost everyone's got a VHS video recorder at home, so that's the format to buy because you can play the tapes directly on your video recorder at home. But you know a chap who does the videos for the local amateur dramatics group, and he says Video8's the way to go, and he wouldn't touch VHSC with a barge pole. Which one of them's right? Well, they kind of both are. Let's look into it in a bit more detail. So here we have a Video8 camcorder and tape and VHSC camcorder and tape from roughly the same vintage. These would be mid to late 1980s. Neither of these are in particularly good condition, but they're good enough to just demonstrate what we're trying to do. So the tapes, they're a similar general dimension, but clearly the VHSC tape is a lot thicker than the Video8 tape. So that makes it a bit harder for camcorders to be as compact on the VHSC format. The VHSC format had an apparent advantage. You could pop the tape into a VHSC adapter like this and put that into your VHS player and play the tape directly. So it seems like a win for VHSC. That is pretty much the only advantage of the VHSC format over Video8. Technically, Video8 is superior in just about any other way you could imagine. So let's look into those a little bit. And it's worth mentioning that these are the early VHSC and Video8. Later on, both formats developed higher resolution variants, Super VHSC, which was compatible with Super VHS tapes, and Hi8. So let's have a look initially at just these. Now, of course, the capability of individual models varied, and these are just two sample camcorders. You wouldn't say, looking at them, that one is definitely superior to the other. In this particular case, the Sony one's a little bit thicker than the the Panasonic, but the Panasonic got a lot more sort of surface area. So, you know, to handle, they're probably quite similar. Just from a aesthetics point of view, personally, I would say that the Sony one looks a lot nicer. But you could imagine somebody buying either of those. So, what are the key features of the two formats? Now, as we've mentioned, you can play this in the VHSC adapter. The tape itself, though, doesn't feel very nice. You can twiddle this, and there's a good reason to twiddle that. You have to pull that back to make sure that there's no slack on the tape. If there is slack on the tape, there's nothing to prevent that from happening, you see. There's no ratcheting that'll stop that from happening. So there's a risk you could have slack on that tape and then put that into machine and it will foul up on the mechanism. And even worse, if you have slack on the tape and you put it into a VHS-C adapter, there's a very real risk that the tape won't load properly, like that. And it's completely missed one of the guides, and depending where the slack is, it can miss on the other guide. Then if you try to play that in your machine, it'll either not work or it could chew up the tape. So these sort of problems with tape slack were a very real issue with VHS-C. And you could also get the situation where the tape would end up on the wrong side of this door inside the VHS-C adapter. And then when the door opened, the tape would be snarled up here and get chewed up as you pull it out. So tape damage on VHS-C is very common for the reasons that these VHS-C adapters would knock 7 bells out the tapes. Now you could argue, I suppose, that well, you don't have to use the adapters, you can play the tape in the camera in the same way as you could play that tape in that camera. Though if you're doing that, it does beg the question about why you chose that format at all. There's something else though, and this is really important. Running time. This is a fairly typical Video8 tape. This is 100 minutes long. They did make them longer, you could get 120-minute tapes. This is a fairly typical VHS-C tape. It's only 45 minutes long, and a lot of VHS-C tapes are only 30 minutes long. They did make a very few 60-minute ones, but then the tape was super thin and would be even more likely to come unstuck in the VHS-C adapter or have slack problems that causes damage to tape. So I'd say I hardly ever come across 60-minute VHS-C tapes. They're nearly always 30 or 45 minutes long, whereas with Video8, nearly all of them, actually most of the ones I get in are 90 minutes long. This particular one's longer at 100. So running time is around about double on the Video8 format. Now that could really matter. Maybe in a domestic environment where you're just recording kids on the lawn, you can keep changing tapes. But your friend who uses camcorders for the amadramatics, he can't do that. He needs to be able to run for something like 90 minutes without changing a tape. So Video8 is a must. Well, you could set these to long play. Most VHS-C camcorders could do a long play recording, so they'd run up to about 90-something minutes. But then the quality suffers badly, whereas you keep the good quality of standard play recording on Video8. And here's another thing. The VHS-C and VHS formats, though they have long play very often, that long play is never guaranteed to play in any other machine apart from the one that made the original recording. So then if you're using VHS-C long play in order to get 90 minutes from that tape, you pretty much have to play it back in the camcorder. If you play it back on your home machine, it may not play back properly or even at all. And you certainly wouldn't want to put your precious memories and keep your precious memories on long play recordings, because there's a possibility in the future that you may never be able to play those tapes properly. And this isn't just a theoretical thing, it actually happens. I do get in long play VHS tapes and VHS-C tapes from time to time that are essentially unrecoverable because there was a small misalignment in the mechanism, and that wouldn't have mattered if it had been run at standard recording speed, but because it's long play and so the track pitch is thinner, the tracks are closer together on the tape, there's no room for misalignment error correction, so you'll finish up with unplayable long play VHS tapes. And something else. If you want to edit the material, and you probably do because you've got loads of shots of your ground and your feet and the sky, you're going to be playing that tape back in there and then recording it onto, say, VHS or Super VHS or something. But then, of course, you now have a VHS to VHS copy from this camcorder. Possibly even a long play VHS to VHS copy. It's like some sort of pirate movie that you got from somewhere down in the market. It's an unwatchable mess. Whereas this, if you play back the tape on there and play on to VHS, you're getting a Video8 to VHS copy, which is much better because Video8 already has higher resolution, better chroma performance and lower noise than VHS. On average, you could get very, very good VHS camcorders that might perform better than very cheap Video8 ones, but on average, picture quality was better on Video8. Let's move on to sound quality, shall we? Both of these camcorders are mono, and higher specification ones, especially the higher performance ones, Super VHS and Hi8, were very often stereo. So you might say, well, they're much the same then. But there's a big difference. Mono VHS-C camcorders recorded a linear audio track along one edge of the tape, which is very low quality indeed. The tape runs very slowly, so the quality is going to be poor, and then of course if your running time problems dictate it, you may be running this in long play, so the tape is running even slower and the sound quality is really very poor. Video8, on the other hand, doesn't have a track on the tape for recording audio. The audio is embedded in the picture using a frequency modulation system, which means that all Video8 camcorders are hi-fi. All of them give excellent sound quality. Even if you run this in long play, you'll still get excellent sound quality. So clearly Video8 had a win there, but if you paid the extra money, you could get VHS hi-fi stereo, and then the sound quality on the VHSC camcorder tape would be in the same order of quality as a stereo Video8 or Hi8 camcorder. So you had to pay extra for good sound on VHSC, whereas it came as standard on Video8. Now this one is mono, but when it came to the Hi8 camcorders, the vast majority of Hi8 camcorders have two microphones and are stereo. One or two mono Hi8 machines were made, but nearly all were stereo. This is a typical Hi8 camcorder. We have left and right stereo microphones, left and right stereo audio out, and of course S-video out, as do the Super VHS-C camcorders as well, for that higher resolution connection, which gives better results with editing. Now the higher performance Super VHS-C format, of course, unless you had a Super VHS video recorder, you couldn't play the tapes even with the adapter on your video recorder. So you would then, if you're upgrading to a Super VHS-C camcorder, like somebody else might have upgraded to a Hi8, you will have to play the tapes in the camcorder. So why didn't you buy a Hi8 anyway? If you're going to have to play the tapes in the camcorder, you might as well have a Hi8, play the tapes in the camcorder, and get the much smaller cassette, the much longer running time, hi-fi sound as standard. Why would you not choose the 8mm format? To counter that, it's probably fair to say that Super VHS video recorders outsold Video8 and Hi8 home video recorders. You could buy them, but they were not huge sellers. I think Super VHS home video recorders were quite popular. And what a lot of people would do is buy a Video8 or Hi8 camcorder and use that with a Super VHS video recorder for editing. And a lot of the enthusiasts, video enthusiasts of the 80s and 90s would use just that combination. So much so that Panasonic actually supported an editing mode with some of their Super VHS video recorders, which had a LANC connector, which this particular camera doesn't seem to support, but many 8mm camcorders have a LANC connector, and you could then do an editing sequence between your Super VHS video recorder and your Hi8 player. You could actually control the Hi8 player from the Super VHS, which was great for editing purposes. I have covered LANC a little bit more on one of my previous videos, so do have a look at that one. Now there's something else. These tapes have an oxide formulation, just like VHS or beta, which makes them quite easy to erase deliberately or otherwise. These use a metal tape formulation as used on later tapes such as miniDV, and it takes a lot more energy to erase a 8mm metal tape than it does one of these. So if you were foolish enough to sit one of these or these tapes next to a big magnet, that one could erase and that one wouldn't. And you might think I'm just spouting now, but I can prove it. So let's put both of these tapes on a degaussing machine, which is a bulk eraser which will send a very strong magnetic field and is designed to erase tapes. And we'll put both of these tapes through the degausser and see what happens to the recordings at the end. Right, here are the sample shots of both tapes before they've been put through the erasing machine.
It's a degausser. Ready, steady, go! Oh! Oh no!
And now some sample shots of both tapes after they've been through the bulk eraser, and actually we put them through twice. So that's pretty conclusive. It's quite easy to accidentally, perhaps, erase or damage the recording of a VHSC tape, and really hard to accidentally erase a Video8 tape. So now, when I get these tapes in, I find that the Video8 tapes virtually always play beautifully, as good as the day they were recorded. There's no magnetic retentivity loss caused by, for example, the Earth's magnetic field or storage in non-ideal conditions, including magnets. Let's take a look at the tapes themselves. If we need to take apart a Video8 tape, it's a straightforward process. There are 5 screws. Take the screws out, open the lid, and we have access there to the tape, which is a straightforward mechanism, very easy to work on. The one exception to that would be that Maxell branded tapes, the spring here is mounted in a strange way, and that spring can ping off and make it impossible to refit the door opening spring mechanism. So that's slightly annoying, but that only applies to Maxell and I think Boots branded cassettes. So clearly Boots had Maxell make their tapes for them. You can sometimes get into a bit of a kerfuffle with the spring connecting to this door. Note that on the Video8 tape, the braking mechanism is simple. When it goes into the machine, a spigot on the bottom of the deck sits in there and releases the brakes and allows the spools to operate. When it's locked, these are able to tighten but not to rotate the wrong way, so you can't get tape slack. The VHSC shell is much more of a bodge up. Because this has to work in the VHSC adapter, the design is more complicated and not really very nice. So let's take this one apart and examine the mechanism. It's immediately obvious this is a much more complicated mechanism. The anti-rollback mechanism that stops tape slack only applies to the supply spool, so there's nothing to stop the take-up spool turning the wrong way, and it frequently does. But there is a catch there to prevent the supply spool from turning the wrong way. Now, it's a good deal more complicated because when this is loaded into the VHSC shell, adapter, VHS adapter, this tape has to run, if I'll just allow it to take some slack, this tape has to go outwards on this side. So there needs to be a guide on the opposite side of the tape where you'd expect it. So normally, of course, a tape would only need guides on the inside, but because the tape is pulled that way in the shell, in the adapter, an extra guide is added here. if you take this spool off, you have to first go through this mechanism, which means taking this off. So for example, if you have a snapped tape, you have to take this off and try to get the spool out without losing all the parts. There's a small plastic film in here which sits on the back edge of the tape, so you need to try to get that back into position, and sometimes that can fall out of the shell altogether. So it can be a much fiddlier process to dismantle and repair one of these than it is the Video8 tape. But this is a good VHSC tape, this Panasonic. There are much worse ones. Some manufacturers, this is a JVC, cheaped out and didn't use proper screws. I mean, if you look at these, they've got a regular thread. I'll put these under the microscope in a minute. Whereas these are much harder to deal with. Let's try and get one out. I am genuinely struggling to take this screw out without chewing up the screwdriver. In fact, I don't think I can. Let's try another one. That one might be coming out. Really difficult to undo. And there's a reason. It has a very coarse thread on it. It's not so much a screw as a fastener that is just rammed in to the cassette shell. And the trouble is, sometimes these will not come out. So on occasions when I've had to repair one of these, if I can't undo all these screws, the only thing I can do is physically break the cassette apart and take the spools out, repair whatever's wrong with it, and then mount it into a better quality cassette. So let me show you that JVC screw versus one that's in a Panasonic tape. So the screw on the left here is the fairly conventional one from a Panasonic VHSC tape, and that's fairly easy to undo. It's normal screw type thread. But what's this thing on the right here from the JVC tape? I mean, I'm not even sure you'd call that a screw at all. It's just a ram it in fastener. So it's clearly designed to go in and never come out again, and that makes the tapes very hard to work on. Totally unnecessary change, and just goes against making VHSC a good quality format. So you might say, I've put up a pretty strong case for why Video8 is a better format than VHSC. And that's true, but there are a few use cases where VHSC might have been better. And one was put to me was, imagine someone in the services, and in one particular case it was someone who was working on naval vessels. He would like to send tapes back to his wife at home, and he would be able to record onto VHSC, send the tape back home, and his wife and family at home wouldn't need a Video8 player in order to be able to play the tapes and see his messages. So under those sort of circumstances, VHSC had a clear advantage. But I think for the vast majority of people who wanted to do video work with their family, or anything a little bit more serious like the amateur dramatics group, they would certainly have preferred the Video8 format. It offered so many more advantages compared to VHSC. Now, in the early days, when these two formats were going, there were on the Video8 side, or the 8mm side, many of the big manufacturers, of course Sony, who invented the format, Sanyo, who had partnered with them on the Betamax affair, and Canon, who probably were one of the big players here, who really helped push Video8 and make it a huge success. Other manufacturers included Hitachi, and other manufacturers too, perhaps some of the smaller ones, who backed Video8. Now, VHSC, on the other hand, the Matt Schuster companies, the companies that lived under Matt Schuster were Panasonic. In fact, Matt Schuster now trades as the Panasonic name. Matt Schuster owned a large portion of JVC, so of course they were a VHSC company. And some of the cheap manufacturers, there was a particularly dreadful camcorder from Chinon, who should have known better because they were a camera manufacturer, and they made probably one of the two worst camcorders ever sold in the 80s, and that of course was VHSC. And the other really appalling camcorder was from Amstrad, and that was VHSC. The major manufacturers that you could name in the VHSC camp, who were proper manufacturers, would have been Philips and Sharp. Though when the writing became on the wall, there came a point at which Video8 was just taking the entire market, and Sharp jumped ship and they joined the Video8 camp, so leaving just the Matsushita companies. Then Philips backed out of camcorders altogether, leaving only the Matsushita companies, which were Panasonic and JVC, slogging away trying to sell these VHSC camcorders when the world had moved on to Video8. So it did still exist to some extent in very small sales up until the late 90s and early 2000s, when digital formats took over. Whether it should have existed that long, you tell me. I think VHSC was a bodge and probably should never have been invented. If everybody had backed Video8, then home Video8 players would have been more popular, and we could have got away with that whole problem of mucking about with those horrible adapters. Now, this, as I said, went on until the digital revolution. But then we kind of did the same thing again. It should be noted, of course, that this is a little bit different to the VHS Betamax argument, because in that case, which format you bought really mattered because of the problems with being able to rent films and the likes. But with a camcorder, it didn't matter so much because you were likely to be playing your own tapes. You probably didn't want to share your tapes with your neighbour. So if you bought Video8 and your neighbour bought VHSC, it didn't really matter, did it? The point being that you would keep the material on the original tapes or copy them to other tapes and do the editing then. So it wasn't that crucial that only one format won. Unlike VHS and Beta and V2000, where there was only going to be one winner in the end. Now that same story is true when we moved on to the digital formats. So the two competing ones, the main competing ones, were miniDV, which is tape, and miniDVD, which of course is a 8cm disc. Let's have a look at those. So here we have a collection of camcorders from the early 2000s. All of these use DVD, and this one is miniDV, but don't feel pleased that just because I've only got one miniDV here that they were not popular, because they were hugely popular. The market that these DVD camcorders were sold to could be argued to be very similar to the VHSC one, because you can, at least in theory, take a disc out of one of these DVD camcorders and then pop it into your DVD player at home and play it directly without any different equipment. You didn't have to play it back on the camcorder. So you could argue that they're very similar in that way to the VHSC market segment. Now, there are a lot of caveats about that. There are a lot of gotchas about playing a disc from one of these. So many I can't even go into them all. But let's try cover some of the major ones, shall we? There were a range of formats for miniDVD, and you will see to some extent that will be reflected on these. This one says plus or minus read write and plus or minus read. So this one can work on plus R and minus R, rewritables and single use, and this one is single layer or dual layer. So that's got it covered, hasn't it? Except it doesn't do the most flexible version of DVD, small DVD, which is called DVD RAM, which I suspect one of these others will. DVD-RAM gives the best editing functions of all the formats. You can edit it easily later, delete pieces and reuse the space and things like that. The trouble with some of these formats is that they weren't always compatible with a home player. So there's a whole host of options available. You could have VR formatted or video formatted discs. You could have them finalized or not finalized. You could have rewritables and single writables, and of course DVD-RAM. So there's a myriad of different sub-formats, some of which will play in domestic DVD players, some will play on certain domestic DVD players, and some of which probably won't. And finalizing can be an issue. With some of the formats, you have to finalize a disc to make it playable on a DVD player. If you fail to finalize it, you may never be able to, because if you don't have your original camcorder anymore, you may not be able to finalize it. You cannot necessarily take a unfinalized disc from a Sony camcorder and finalize it in a Panasonic. One or two combinations will work, but most won't. So there are many potential pitfalls with mini DVDs. Some also here, and I'm not sure which, maybe this one, you have to load the disc into a kind of a caddy before you put it in the machine, which is just more faff. Some of the DVDs, in order to get more recording time, not this one, but some are double-sided, which is asking for trouble, because they're almost guaranteed to get scratched on one side or the other. And scratches are a real problem, because if they're scratched after a recording has been made, you may not be able to play it back. If it's scratched before a recording is made, you can almost certainly never play it back on anything, because if you have scratches or fingerprints or dirt on the disc, the laser will reflect off that material before it gets down to the disc, and so the recording will be made badly and probably won't be playable at all. It's extremely common, I find, when extracting data from recordable DVDs, to have something that you can play okay on VLC player, but if you try to edit it in any video editing software, then you get lip sync errors, and that's to say the picture and sound start to drift apart. So, no, mini DVDs were awful. However, these manufacturers were quite happy to sit on both sides of the fence, because I think all of these manufacturers also made, and many more, also made miniDV camcorders. And here's a typical, this one's Sony, and it's been dropped and has a somewhat damaged effect, but that's a pretty ordinary miniDV camcorder taking these extremely popular tapes. Now, of course, those you would play back in camera, but editing was much better. We were just getting to the point in the 2000s where you had a chance of being able to edit with a computer. So they would have a FireWire socket, that one, and you could plug that into a reasonably powerful computer and use video editing software to extract full quality lossless DV-AVI files of 13 gigabytes per hour and edit with no quality loss at all from these tapes. Editing from DVD was at best hit and miss, because these are compressed with MPEG-2, which doesn't lend itself at all well to editing. So you may be able to play back material and watch it, but that was about as good as it got. So miniDVD was for people who just wanted to point and shoot and really didn't care much about how it worked. And another problem is just in terms of the quality. Even when they work properly, and even when you've selected the recording time properly, this will give you an hour of extremely high quality recordings, virtually broadcast standard depending on the quality of your camcorder, or an hour and a half in long play. Whereas the picture quality on these was not so good, and particularly poor if there was too much motion. If there was too much motion going on, it all started to break up into squares. And furthermore, you wouldn't want to knock either of these types of camcorder during recording, but this, if you knock it, you might, if you clob it really hard, you might lose a fraction of a second of your recording. With this, you hit it really hard, the laser can skip across from where it's supposed to be on the disc and may not get back in time to carry on the recording, or it may even corrupt some of the recording that's already on the disc. So they were not very good at being knocked around during recording. And if you knocked them around during finalizing, you would probably trash the disc. There was another format too. Sony came along with this, which in a way was the worst of all worlds. This is micromv, and it boasts the smallest videocassette format ever made. And though in many ways it feels more like the miniDV format, tape pops in there, the recording method was actually more akin to DVD, so it's compressed in MPEG-2. And though they have what appears to be a FireWire socket, actually the output of that is MPEG-2. Most video editing software didn't support it, and it's quite possible now that no video editing software supports this data stream. So I found playback on this is best done with high quality analog connection. So I'd use the cable that goes into there, which gives you left and right audio and S-video out, and I'd digitize that as a DV FireWire stream using an external encoder, which gives more reliable editing than trying to edit the files directly off here. I did try many times to edit the MPEG-2 files that came off here, and there were always problems. The sound would come and go or not work at all, or it was so unreliable. So that was a bit of a fail. That format died quite promptly. Now, of course, we all use modern camcorders which can record 4K resolution straight onto an SD card, so the problem with different formats has gone away now. Please remember to like, share and especially subscribe, and I'll do a lot more content on audio and video technology in the near future. Bye for now.